The lights. Delighted to be here. Delighted to have Mr. Rosen here as we're going to talk about his book. I'll tell you again at the end of the session that there are books available on the table in the back during the reception. But it's great to be able to talk to you about your book. And I want to start off and talk about the title of the book, The Pursuit of Happiness, and what the Founding Fathers thought about the definition of the pursuit of happiness and the context of it in our Declaration.
Absolutely. So it's wonderful to be here, and I'm so excited to tell you about this unusual COVID-era reading project that led me to explore what the founders meant by the pursuit of happiness. So let me tell you how it happened. During COVID, I noticed that both Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson define happiness not as feeling good, but as being good. Not the pursuit of immediate pleasure, but the pursuit of long-term virtue. And what made me realize this is that they both chose as their definition of happiness a book by Cicero I'd never heard of called the Tusculan Disputations. And Cicero's motto was, "Without virtue, happiness cannot be." So it was during COVID, and I thought I'd better read Cicero. I'd never heard of it before because it was so important to both Franklin and Jefferson. What else to read? Then I found this amazing reading list that Jefferson would hand out whenever anyone asked him how they should be educated when he was old. And he'd give this to kids who were going to law school and to his friends. And what was so amazing is both the breadth of the books and also Jefferson's schedule. The books include novels and politics and history and moral philosophy. My eye was caught by the moral philosophy section. It started with that Cicero book, the Tusculan Disputations, then all sorts of Stoic philosophers, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke and Francis Hutcheson. And basically I thought, I've got to read these books because I somehow missed them. I've had this amazing liberal arts education, but all of these moral philosophy books had just fallen out of the curriculum when I was going to college. The other thing that totally caught my mind is Jefferson's schedule. He said, you got to get up before dawn, spend 2 hours reading moral philosophy, watch the sunrise, then read political philosophy, then lunch, then science, then dinner, then you're allowed some Shakespeare and light poetry, then to bed. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I don't know what happened, what got into me, but it was COVID and we all had more time, and I decided to follow the Jefferson schedule. And I got up every morning for a year. I read the Stoics. I watched the sunrise. I found myself writing these weird sonnets to sum up the wisdom that I'd read. And I did this for a year, and what I learned changed my life. It changed my understanding of how to be a good person and how to be a good citizen. And what I discovered from all these marvelous books is that for most of human history, happiness meant self-mastery, self-improvement, character improvement, being your best self. They put it in terms of impulse control. They said using your unreasonable passions like anger, jealousy, and fear and converting them to calm tranquility, prudence, temperance, courage, and justice, the classical virtues, so you could be your best self and serve others. It was just a completely different understanding of happiness. It totally changed in the 1960s when happiness came to be understood as feeling good, not being good, and rediscovering it changed both the way I live, how I read, and also how I think about how to be a good citizen.
So it sounds like this was really a personal journey that then turned into the book. And when you wrote the book, two things: who did you think your audience was, and what were your goals for the book?
What a great question. The truth is I didn't have any initial goal in the year of reading except to improve my mind and also find guidance for how to live. When I was in college in the 80s, it was the greed is good decade, you do you and Gordon Gekko, and I was kind of looking for an alternative to the hedonism and the materialism that were celebrated by pop culture. And what I didn't realize, because all this great wisdom had fallen out of the curriculum, is that this is exactly the question the classical authors set out to answer. So mostly it was really a self-help enterprise for myself about how to provide, lessons for a good life. But then once I decided to write a book about how the founders applied these lessons, I just wanted to share with Americans what I'd learned and how it changed my understanding of the founding, both about citizenship and government. I was just kind of writing to the readers of America. You know, I talk about them as you. I kind of give suggestions at the end of the book. I've got a reading list. And what's so gratifying is that people across the country are responding. I've been at some really moving convenings, like in Cooksville, Tennessee, and in Elkhart, Indiana. Retirees convened about 500 people to meet in their local churches to discuss the founders and the pursuit of happiness and character improvement. And we're taking it into schools by developing a curriculum for middle and high schools. Adult learners are really resonating to it. But the biggest thing that's really resonating, and I'm eager to share this with all of you, what changed most was, for me, was helping me rediscover the daily habits of deep reading. I'd basically gotten out of the habit of doing reading that wasn't related to my immediate deadlines or my job. And although I'm no longer following this crazy Jefferson schedule, I do have a new rule that when I wake up in the morning, I'm not allowed to browse or surf until I've read. I have to read for, an hour or two. I do read on a Kindle because it just blows my mind that all the books in the world are on this device. You think about how the founders had to fight for access to books, and they're all just here waiting to be read. And I need enough discipline every morning to swipe left to the Kindle and not right to my email or do the browsing or all the things I'm as addicted to as anyone else. But just that habit, which really was one of the founders' definition of virtue, has led me to do a whole lot of new reading. And I just finished a new book, which I'm actually turning in tomorrow. I'm so excited to share this, about how the battle between Hamilton and Jefferson defined all of American history. It was another amazing year and a half of reading and learning. But it's just, we all know that the biggest educational crisis in America is that people are not reading anymore. And it's not just kids, it is we adults, because everyone's addicted to these screens. And speaking for myself, I'll just say getting back into the daily habit of reading is just the best new habit I've developed as an adult, and I'm now an evangelist for the transformative power of daily reading.
So, and again, we have the hard copies of the book. I read the hard copy of the book, and that's one way. Hide your phone away and read the book. So we don't have a lot of time, but I thought we would talk about Jefferson and Washington, and then bookend with Frederick Douglass, and Abraham Lincoln. And if we have a little bit of time, we'll talk then about education based on these virtues. So you mentioned Jefferson. Let's talk a little bit more about him, both his virtuous side and his not so virtuous side. And like I told you before, I think you did a really good job of covering Jefferson, warts and all.
Well, he's such a complex, challenging, multifaceted character. His virtuous side was his reading. There's something very moving about the correspondence that he had with John Adams. They're in their 80s. They've fought a presidential election. The country almost came apart over partisanship. They reconcile, and what do they want to do? They talk about books. And Adams is so excited to learn that Pythagoras, the founder of Greek moral philosophy, may have traveled to the East and read the Hindu Vedas. And Jefferson, after a lifetime of reflection, has concluded he's no longer a Stoic, but an Epicurean, and by which he means the kind of rational contraction of desire so you can virtually meet them. It's so open-minded of them constantly to be learning and growing and talking about books, and that really was an inspiration to me. The great hypocrisy and shame of Jefferson, of course, is slavery, and I'm sorry to share that reading more deeply made him appear even more hypocritical rather than less. Like all the other enslavers of his generation, he acknowledged the immorality of slavery. None of the people who held slaves in that generation defended it. I found this amazing quote from Patrick Henry that really helped me understand where they were coming from, as they say. Patrick Henry has just given the "Give me liberty or give me death" speech in Virginia, and then he says, "Is it not amazing that I myself, who believe that slavery violates the Bible and natural law, myself own slaves, I won't justify it, I won't attempt to. It's simple avarice or greed I can't do with the inconvenience of living without it." It's just amazing. He said, you know, he knows it's wrong, he knows it's wicked, but he likes the lifestyle and he doesn't want to give it up. And in his moments of candor, Jefferson also recognized that it was his own avarice or greed that made him constantly saying slavery should end in the distant future, but always never doing anything about freeing his own enslaved population. He finally freed his own kids by Sally Hemings on his deathbed, as he promised her he would do, but he freed no one else, and kids had to be separated from parents, and all of his fears about passing on debts to his daughters were made real because he lived like a Caligulan emperor. He was constantly preaching frugality and industry, but he surrounds himself at Monticello with French furniture and luxuries, and he just likes the lifestyle and can't give it up. So it's not a pretty or easy picture, but it is striking that he did understand his own hypocrisy. He said, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just," and he saw it in terms of the classical vice of avarice or greed.
Yes, and you say he had a remarkable capacity for self-rationalization, which I think is a message to all of us. And then the other on this bookend would be George Washington, and you talk about Cicero, you've talked about influencing Franklin and Jefferson, but then Seneca, who you said was the greatest Roman philosopher since Cicero, strongly influenced Washington. And what I'd like you to talk about is the poignant story of when Washington was going to face a mutiny, and he was able to diffuse that situation and bring the soldiers who were going to rebel to tears.
I'm so glad you asked me about that moment, because Washington never appeared greater. It's 1784, and as you say, the troops are threatening to mutiny at Newburgh because Congress won't pay them. They can't get their back pay, they can't afford shoes, and there's mutiny in the air. Washington mounts this wooden stage called the Temple of Virtue, and he pleads for the classical virtues of patience and temperance. He says to the troops, just wait a little bit longer and I'll ensure that you get paid. And he's written this speech, and he struggles to read it, and he takes out his reading glasses and he starts to read the speech, and he says, "Forgive me, gentlemen, I've grown old in your service, and now I've grown almost blind." And the soldiers weep. They've never seen him confess any weakness before. And it's at this moment of self-possessed humility that Washington seems never greater. And it's that self-possession, that mastery of his temper, that makes him the greatest man of his time. He presides over the Constitutional Convention. He says very little, but it's because people know that he'll be the president that they're able to pass a strong constitution. He's almost never seen to lose his temper in public because he gets from Seneca the importance of time. He has clocks everywhere, and he's always keeping his schedule, and of self-mastery. And it's that shining force of his character that makes him the greatest American.
You also talk about his farewell address to the soldiers and to the country, although it really wasn't his farewell to the country. And he says he encouraged people to sacrifice their individual advantages to the interest of the community. Yes.
Well, the farewell address is just crucial for us at this moment in time. What is Washington? Washington's not sure the American experiment's going to succeed. He's worried about factions, that is, groups animated by passion rather than reason, devoted to self-interest rather than the public good. He sees signs of mutiny and civil war everywhere. What's his solution? Education. He calls for the creation of a national university where people can come from across America, set aside their partisan differences and geographic preferences, and learn two things: the fundamental principles of the science of government, and also the habits of civil dialogue, how to disagree without being disagreeable, how to listen to competing points of view, how to have a conversation about what the Constitution means. I'm so excited to be here with Janine Yas and Jeannie Allen, because thanks to Janine and Jeff Yas, the National Constitution Center's just partnered with Khan Academy to create an online Constitution course that fulfills Washington's hope for a national university. It's the bravo, yeah, absolutely. It's so exciting, it's transformative. It just launched on Constitution Day. It's the first civics Constitution class that Khan Academy has done, and it brings together the greatest legal scholars and historians in America of diverse perspectives, liberal and conservative, to teach the basic principles of the Constitution. Democracy, equality, liberty, separation of powers, federalism, the Bill of Rights. There are 13 modules. There are these great professors. There are primary texts. We're just evangelists for reading the documents yourself. There are quizzes. I just took the quiz. It's pretty tough, actually, and I want you to take it, and I know you'll do well, but you got to take some time with it. And isn't this amazing? This is free and online. I want you and all the teachers in the audience to check it out and bring it to your classrooms, to work with the NCC and Khan to spread the word. We hope to create middle school versions and versions for college. And there's so many challenges to this online world we're living in with all of its distraction. But the most exciting part of it is that all the books in the world are online, and now we can create the greatest teachers in America, a kind of virtual university like George Washington hoped for, and teach civics to every American.
So I want to go on, but before I do, I just had this thought. We got all these Yas Prize winners. Okay, the gamers, this is it, right? It's the play Hamilton. To reach the middle schoolers, let's gamify, do whatever you can do, and have fun with it. Partner with Philip, Jeffrey, so that we can get this information to them. I want to go on to Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. I thought it was interesting that they actually both read the Columbian Orator, which I've never heard of before, but I'd like you to talk about some of their similar values from reading that, and then their personal relationship with each other as well.
I'm so glad you found that book. It's called The Columbian Orator. It was a small book of selections from the classical philosophers, as well as quotations from Benjamin Franklin, a dialogue on slavery that inspired Frederick Douglass to become the greatest abolitionist of his time. What was the moment when Douglass felt most enslaved? Not just when his body was shackled, but when his wicked master forbade him from learning how to read. And he said at that moment he felt like his master was trying to control his mind. What did he do? He went onto the streets of Baltimore and he bought reading lessons with bread. He paid local boys to teach him how to read. And then he bought with bread this book, The Columbian Orator. And reading the dialogue on slavery convinced him to be an abolitionist, and he turned himself into the greatest freedom fighter of his time. I have to share, I just gave a talk with David Blight, the great biographer of Frederick Douglass, and you've got to read Blight's biography if you hadn't. And he brought out a first edition of this book, and it's this tiny little thing. It's barely bigger than my iPhone. And you just think of what Douglass, and also Lincoln, who learned how to read and how to think from this book, what they had to do to fight, first to learn how to read it in the first place, and then to get access to books. And then you think about the fact that all the books in the world are on this phone, which is barely bigger than the Columbian Orator. And for goodness sake, if you think about those sacrifices, if Frederick Douglass can make those sacrifices to learn how to read, I can darn well, do my daily reading. And it completely gives the lie to those who claim that this is some sort of elitist project just for the privileged. This great wisdom has inspired freedom fighters of all backgrounds throughout history. Lincoln had to borrow books, and once when one was left out in the rain, he had to pull corn for 3 days to pay the farmer back to pay for the book. This is a miracle that we live in this age when the books themselves are essentially free, and that is why it is so urgently important for us to work together to inspire deep reading.
So we don't have much time left, but I did want a couple of quotes. One from Douglass: "The solution to the violent passion of prejudice was the cool reason of education." And then you talk about Horace Mann. Let me go back. Douglass also explicitly connected equal opportunity for education with the pursuit of happiness. So it's education and learning these virtues, learning the self-discipline. And then Horace Mann, who you describe as the founder of American public schools, just quickly, he believed in teaching character and virtue in our schools. So maybe just to end where it sounds Mann started, how this group can help with that goal.
Absolutely, and it's so great to work with this group. So at the Constitution Center, we're creating an online course about the founders and the virtues, jumping off the book. And the virtues are the ones that Franklin and everyone identified: temperance, prudence, courage, industry, order, humility. The way to teach them is by telling stories. We all know that the way to learn about history is storytelling. And you read the stories of these inspiring heroes like Frederick Douglass, and you want to be like them. I read about Jefferson's schedule, and I wanted to practice it. So by having vivid, compelling storytelling, talking about both famous founders and lesser-known founders like Phyllis Wheatley, the first black poet, Mercy Otis Warren, Abigail Adams, the men and women throughout history who have practiced these virtues and made heroic sacrifices to embody them. And the history has to be warts and all. We're not going to deny the complexity of history, but on balance, you read about the history of the fight for self-mastery and virtue throughout American history, and it's an inspiring story. The arc always bends upward, as Martin Luther King said, and working together, we can inspire kids and learners of all ages across America to practice the virtues and pursue happiness. So great to be with you. Thank you all.